This is the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game.
Rule number one is you have to believe in yourself. You're the only one who doesn't think you belong in this appointment. The prospect has already validated your existence by scheduling time with you. Get it through your head you belong here, go in there, crush it, and close the deal.
A place where sales professionals can come to learn from other sales professionals and thought leaders that have mastered their craft.
The difference between a good salesperson and a best-in-class salesperson is only 2 minutes. By spending an extra 2 minutes on what you might think is a mundane task in the sales game, you separate yourselves from the pack, you grow your book of business, you close more deals, and you retain your accounts.
As well as their peers who are still striving for perfection to achieve their why.
I have a wife and 4 kids. Failure is not an option.
Real sales professionals, real stories, real results. Are you ready to feel the power?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Power Producers Podcast, where we are refining and redefining the sales game. Today, we have a great guest for you, Mr. Tim Rohling from Rohling Sales Growth Advisors, and also the host of the Growth Process Podcast, a podcast I was fortunate enough to be a guest on here in the past couple of weeks. And we just basically sat and talked shop for 25 minutes and honestly could have gone for a little while longer. So it made sense to have Tim come over and hang out with us on Power Producers for a little bit. So that's what we're going to do this afternoon, and hope everybody enjoys the ride. As we get ramped up, Tim, why don't you kind of give everybody your backstory on how you got to where you're at today with your own sales and growth consulting firm?
Sure. Thanks, David and Kyle. It's a privilege to be here and be on your podcast and share some insights with your listeners. So my background is, oddly enough, I come from an engineering background and I migrated to sales. So how did that happen?
That is odd.
It is odd, right? So I did engineering out of school for 10 or 12 years, liked it. It just didn't suit me long term. What I found was as I started to get more involved in like pre-construction sales, my background was civil engineering. I really enjoyed that process and being out talking to people and nurturing the relationships and helping see projects through from start to finish. From that field, I went to product sales and was a field sales rep, just knocking on doors for 10 or 12 years, and I loved it. What I found was that when you build process into your day, you can do very well, and it's a great profession, and you can just help people. And that's really what sales is fundamentally. It's offering a solution to help somebody get better at whatever it is they're doing. So from the field sales rep, I migrated into sales management, which is a whole nother discipline, right? I will probably dive into the concept of being the best sales producer into sales manager, which is a completely different skill set. And then in executive leadership, where you need just that leadership that provides more vision. So I've been through all 3 of those, cycles. But I bring that analytic mindset, which I think you need now more than ever, not just in sales management and leadership, but also as a producer or sales rep. You just need to have that analytical mind to start to analyze your own performance and bring that to the team as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, man, because with all the technology that's out there, I honestly think sales should be a whole lot easier for us because the deck is stacked in our favor. I mean, I can remember way back when, one of my first outside sales jobs was literally selling satellite dishes door to door in West Virginia, and 65% of the state had no cable TV. My biggest obstacle was actually getting the people approved for the financing to be able to buy the dish. But it was a matter of how did you work the system, right? How did, number one, was there a system for selling satellite dishes door to door? And then number 2, how does that morph over time? I actually talked about this job in my first book, but I actually developed a cable interest survey that I would go door to door and I would just ask a series of questions like, how much do you pay a month for cable? Oh, you don't have cable. You don't say. We already knew they didn't have cable. We looked to see before we ever pulled down that road. But, we would get into how much do you spend at the movie theater for tickets? Do you buy food when you go there? Do you go out to eat before or after? How many movies are you renting a month? And when you do that, do you have pizza delivered and all of these things? And what we were doing was we were coming up with the cost of entertainment for a household every month and then showing them they could replicate that by getting a dish that provided them hundreds of channels, and they would save a significant amount of money by doing that. And so I talk about that because it's very, very similar to the sales style that we use today in selling total cost of risk, as opposed to going in and selling insurance premium, right? Everybody's got a premium, but what really goes into that premium, and what are all the other costs associated with your risk management program, like soft costs of claims or retained losses, whether active or passive, meaning they have a deductible or self-insured retention, or they don't. Either way, that money's coming out of pocket. We can go right down the list, but essentially it's all things that are direct cost. Soft costs or direct in some cases associated with your insurance and risk management program, but they're not calculated in premium. And most businesses don't ever think to go back and actually quantify that as part of the spend for that department in their operation. So if we can go in and quantify that information to them, we're home free. But where I was going with this is, I remember back when I was selling dishes door to door, I started out going and knocking and doing these cable interest surveys in person. And then I found out this awesome thing called the Kohl's directory, which I could then use to target a geography. So rather than me, and so I would, plan my day out by going to the Kohl's directory. And then I'm like, what am I doing, man? I could do these cable interest surveys over the phone, dial through a whole lot more people than what I would be able to go knock on doors. And so I started, I basically ended up with a call list where I made my call list from the Kohl's directory in areas that I knew didn't have cable television, and I would basically pitch what I had to say over the phone. And when I showed up, we were just getting paperwork signed. It blew my mind how easy it was. But, I think it's the same thing, except we got a lot more toys and tools today. We're not dealing with the Kohl's directory. We're dealing with laser focused data that you can pretty much get with a little bit of effort online. And I just think that for salespeople that are motivated, it's a great time to be a salesperson, right? But just like anything else, there's always going to be that divide between the motivated and the lazy. And that's the other thing. It makes the lazy look even lazier because it's so much easier to get the information you didn't get. If you don't want to put forth effort today, I don't know that it's the right job for you, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's almost, when you look at the tools that are out there, we used to have to go out and generate activity. And that was, you could say that activity times your effectiveness would yield a sale. Well, now the activity is so easy to generate. The question is, how good are you at engaging and then building that effectiveness? I almost think with the tools that we have, you still need to build trust, right? And you need to do it fairly quickly. And depending on who's running the tools, you can either accelerate that trust, or you can really hurt the process and set yourself and your organization back. So you have to be very, very careful with how you use these tools, but they are fantastic when you get them in your hands and get the right content to the right audience.
I need to go back to the satellites for a second. I'll defer to your expertise, because I truly don't know. Now, is it do you need a satellite? Is it like a cable box where you need a satellite for each different TV that you have? No, right?
So they had it. It was different ways, man. It was kind of an interesting time to be doing that because the direct TV and Dish Network stuff had not even been invented yet. It came out right at the very end of my time there. But we were selling the big 6.5 foot C-band satellite dishes. And so traditionally, you could only have one receiver that went to that dish, but they had morphed, to a later time where you could have, I think you were able to have two. The problem is you couldn't have two TVs that wanted to watch channels on different satellites because, that thing literally moved like this across, depending on which of the satellites you were going to pick your channels up off of. So the whole thing changed. I don't even know that they make those or anybody buys them anymore. Once DirecTV and Dish Network came out, it solved the problem and changed things completely. And I don't even know that those exist anymore because or at least they're waning because, when we signed up for cable this last time, we bought it through AT&T, but then DirecTV bought that. So I have DirecTV at the house, but it's all streaming. It's not done through a dish.
That's interesting. So the reason I'm asking about this is yesterday I was playing golf and one of the houses that backed up to the course, literally it had 6 satellites clustered on the back of its house. And I was just like, I haven't seen a satellite like that in a long time. And I was just like, is there something going on here that I don't know?
Was it like the little dishes that were 18 inches or was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. It would be interesting to see because even with those, you didn't have to have
Mars. Like, what's going on here?
Right.
They had something else going on.
Right. Anyhow.
So go ahead, Kyle.
No, well, okay. So the question, one of the things that you brought up when you were first talking, Tim, was the sometimes the I guess inability to transfer from being like a top salesperson into a leadership role. And I think that's true. That's why Michael Jordan's not a basketball coach in the NBA, right? I mean, like some of these guys have a huge problem with that. And I think in sales, it's the same thing. So I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that.
I think it's a transition from that individual contributor mindset to the team coach, and if you're not attuned to that, it's going to be very, very difficult, along with the ability to analyze the data, motivate your team. If you're a sales rep and you're a good sales rep, you're used to running and gunning, talking to people, growing sales for your benefit, but also for the team. It's just a completely different mindset. And we don't spend time as leaders of organizations to really train and coach to that. We put the person in a role, we say good luck. That could potentially be a double loss, right? You just pulled your best producer out of the field.
Yeah.
They have the team reporting to them that may not necessarily want to report to them. There's all kinds of dynamics that go on there. So you might start losing team members. This person's struggling. They're not happy. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be very careful and coach that person on how to be that manager, that team leader with positive coaching, which is critically important and kind of because what's going to happen is they might find out, oh no, this is a lot more different than I think, and start lashing out in terms of frustration to the team, and that can be compounded. And the compensation side too, right? You don't necessarily pay the managers on the same scale that you're going to pay the sales reps. This person might make more money in the field than they do 100%. As a manager. So that's to be considered as well. So it's just a completely different game that needs to be coached. And that's business ownership. It's their responsibility to make sure that happens.
I think that's part of the problem too, is business. I think a lot of times people gravitate toward that top producer thinking they're going to be the one that's going to be the best to teach other people. And I mean, I even go back, I go back to my days in the grocery industry. I always thought it was ridiculous, but whoever the fastest and best stocker was the person who got promoted to be the leader of the stock crew. And, while in my case, that ended up being a good decision for the company, I just didn't really think that was the best way to identify talent. Right. And I mean, right. So carry that forward. I'm a student of leadership. I've read everything that John Maxwell puts out. I've been to his seminars and I follow a lot of other people. And so I tend to think about things fairly objectively when it comes to leadership, because to me, I don't care if your behavior is good behavior or bad behavior. If people are following what you're doing, then you're a leader. I just need to redirect you to positive things as opposed to otherwise. And so the example that I'm going to use was that, when I got my role with Super Target originally, I was in my regular role for literally just a couple of months, and then they had somebody leave and they pushed me to overnight replenishment, which was absolutely a worst case scenario for me at the time. And I had to be responsible for literally every single thing that happened on the graveyard shift. And so I was probably a month in, and there was a guy that would come in. I'll never forget, his name was James, and he would show up probably 20 or 30 minutes late every single night, every night, without question. And when I got the job, I was told that I needed to make James go away because he was a problem, because he was late every night, and he would come in, and when he got there, everybody would start paying attention to him, and it drug down the process of unloading the truck and this, that, and the other. And so I'm of the mindset that if James has an attendance problem, I want to know why. Like, I'm not going to just sit here and berate him and, write him up and all of this. Like, if it's something that happens every single night, there's something going on. And so I asked him, I said, just out of curiosity, I said, look, I'm not here to beat up on you and or whatever else. We're both grown adults. I said, but you do have an attendance problem. I said, you're scheduled to be here at 10 o'clock every night, and it's usually 10:20, 10:30 before you get here. Why? And he said, because my wife doesn't even get home until 10 after 10. She works till 10. She comes home, and I have time to maybe pass her quickly, and then I leave and come to work since she's there to help the kids. And I said, so if you were in my position, how would you solve this problem? He goes, well, I doubt you can adjust my schedule. They never have in the past. And I said, well, what would be a reasonable adjustment? If I had you come in at 11, would that be okay? Or if I waited until midnight, would that be okay for you to come in? So at least you had some time with your wife in the evenings before it was time for you to come into your shift. And he said, man, he goes, that would be incredible. He said that I would love it. And I said, and the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is, I said, I'm going to keep my eye on what you're doing. And I said, I'm not saying that from a micromanaging standpoint. I said, but I think you're well respected, man. And I think one of the things that has caused people to be so up in arms about the fact that you walk in late every day is because a lot of other people look up to you and follow what you're doing, and it disrupts the team. And I said, has anybody ever talked to you about possibly looking at going into management with the company? He said, you got to be kidding me. I'm late every day. Nobody wants. And I said, we already fixed that problem. Now, if it continues after the schedule change, that's going to be an issue. And I said, but I really feel like if you have an interest, your work is great when you're here, but you also have a really good relationship with all of the other people on the team. And so I'm not going to go through the rest of the story, but it ended up with this guy is actually a manager for them now. Like he 20 some years later, he got an opportunity, but it goes back to the fact that I think sometimes we're so pigeonholed in what we're looking for that we don't see an opportunity that presents itself in front of us. And that's why I started out with, a leader is somebody who has people following them. It doesn't matter if their behaviors are positive or negative. I mean, there's plenty of people that run street gangs that are leaders, right?
Yeah.
Because they got plenty of people that are willing to do stupid stuff to ruin the rest of their life, but they're following what these people do. And so I just, it's always interesting to me. And I guess where I would go with this question is, when you're working with a company to help them build sales growth, and in the insurance industry, bar none, the hardest role to fill is a producer, right? I mean, account managers are definitely a close second because they're not growing on trees either. But for you to find somebody that's a pure producer that can come in and just crush it, you're not going to find those people. They're few and far between. So you have to build them. My question is, what type of profiling or testing, personality tests, ideal traits, whatever, do you have a company use to define who's going to be a successful salesperson or not? Or do you not believe in using those at all?
They're okay. I kind of believe in experience and looking for traits. Were they successful in the past at any role? It doesn't have to be sales necessarily, but I prefer people outside of that industry. We've talked about that in the past. Prior to doing this, I was a family business owner and led sales there, and I never hired somebody from the same industry because they had behaviors that you didn't necessarily want, or a preset mindset that didn't allow you to help them be successful in your business. So I look for past success in sales, but not industry related first and foremost. And if we're looking for leadership or management position, your example in the store was a great example of what I call human leadership, which I differentiate from plain old leadership. Leadership says, hey, we're going to hit a goal. It's a finite point in time. Human leadership examines the aftermath. Is the team energized? Do they want to continue working with you when the project's done? If the answer is yes, then that's human leadership, because you're building sustainability over time. So some of that track record can also apply to the producer or the sales rep as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of times those top producers just don't, like, they have short patience. I remember, so my wife is now a manager at ADP, and she was a top rep there. She was a top rep at the company that her and I both worked at beforehand. And her issue initially was, like, when she would have people on her team that just either were not producing or weren't getting it, just having a really short fuse and being like, dude, like, expecting them to be able to go out and do the same things that she could. It's just not realistic. Not everybody's going to do that. And I think, she has a producer on her team right now that makes like double what she does. And there's another one in the company, same thing, that's going to sell, this is payroll, that's going to sell over $1.5 million in payroll deals this year. And it's all self-gen stuff. This girl's crazy, David. I'll have to tell you about her, but like, it's nuts.
I'm licking my chops wondering why we haven't interviewed her yet.
Yeah, well, it honestly probably could come down the road a little bit, but it's like both of them would be absolutely horrific, like, leaders or managers of a team, because it's just not in their DNA.
No, just not who they are.
No.
Yeah.
Well, let's call it what it is too. I think that if you're a really good producer, you have a proclivity to have an ego too. And that's not something that's well received when you're in a leadership or management role.
Sure.
People don't want you constantly rubbing it in their face that, well, when I was a sales producer, or when I did this, when I did that. Well, what's that really going to get you in life, right? Just teach them the way. You don't have to, they're going to assume this is how you did it. There's just so much lost in messaging. And the other thing too is, in my experience, I've worked with a lot of salespeople that are really, really selfish. They want to hold on to their secrets. They don't want to share them. They don't want to build the team or make it any better. From my perspective,
I've always found that to be odd.
Yeah, I agree. And so
they're also competitive. They want to win. So they're like you said, they're holding their secrets.
Yeah. And so from my perspective, I've always said that if I'm going to branch out and have people be leaders of different vertical markets inside of Florida Risk Partners, because we have several affinity brands and other things, I've always thought it would be really cool to assign a producer to a specific vertical market and let them take it and run with it. And then if they wanted to expand that brand, they could be responsible for recruiting sales talent and account managers and things. But as part of the process, I would also be willing to compensate them with an override on whatever they were generating with the people who were under their supervision and leadership. And then I could play those people against each other in contests and things, between the different vertical markets inside the agency. But I think that also helps you develop people at a lower level, so that if there's a time when it's ready for, I'm ready to exit, now I've got leadership developed automatically on a smaller scale. It should be a relatively easy transition to move in and fill my shoes. So, I think it's always been very interesting, because and the other thing is, a lot of people, I don't know how much this has changed. You actually probably have a much better perspective, because I'm sort of narrowed down to my own little fiefdom here, but I think people are more typically inclined to grow their management or promote from within more than they hire outside. And I think that that's probably a little bit of a miscalculation too, because you may actually have better management talent that is willing to come and work with you. And I think those people are likely more readily available on the streets than the people who are actually going out and doing the producing. Could be completely wrong, but it seems like the management job is one that's often overlooked from an outside perspective.
It's completely overlooked from an outside perspective. The other aspect of modern sales management, it's not just managing your sales team anymore. You have to help manage the brand, sometimes develop, especially in the small to mid-sized organization. You have to integrate marketing. You have to have a process for building your sales pipeline. You have to integrate that human leadership we talked about. You have to build customer service operations. You have to have conversations across the organization, maybe with operations, marketing, accounting, you name it. So you have to be much more collaborative than ever in the past. And I just don't know that, and this isn't a blanket over everybody, that some of the top producers are going to have that mindset. You may have that in your organization, you may not, but I would not exclude going out and recruiting for those people, because they have to be more collaborative and cross-functional than ever.
Yeah, and I think that when you're coming from the same environment, you're already set in your ways enough and have your own opinions. It's very difficult. You have your own opinions on people too. It makes it very, very difficult to be objective.
No question, which is key, right? You have to not pigeonhole and play the favorite game. So coming in from outside can definitely be an advantage.
Kyle, you ran into that. I mean, when you were at Quill, you ran a team at one point, and you had been just a regular salesperson to some point. I mean, how did they determine that you were ready to run a team? And then when you did, what'd that transition look like?
Yeah. So with that business model, they were really trying to develop anybody that they could into those roles, but it didn't happen. Like I was there for an extraordinarily long period of time, like selling office supplies business to business for 5.5 years. And part of it was because of the relationships I had. The guy that interviewed and hired me ended up becoming, my boss and opening up his own office. And I went, with him to Orlando to do that. And then we came back here. We're running an office here. So we had a pretty good friendship. But I mean, it was always something that I had wanted to do. I mean, look, I played team sports. I was the point guard. I was the captain. Like it was just something that I always naturally kind of gravitated to, except for school projects. That shit was lame. I wanted no part in captaincy in that. Like, I'm just going to ride everybody else's coattails for that aspect of things. But no, I mean, it was so like the way it worked was, you would have to kind of go and establish yourself or establish consistency yourself and prove that you could do the job that you were going to be training other people to do. And with that role, it was relatively basic stuff. I mean, we had a pitch, you learn the pitch, you overcome objections, and you get a lot of like on the spot sales training with seeing 30, 40, 50 businesses a day. So it was a very fast, rapid progression because of that. But dude, there were tons of growing pains. I mean, it was something that I had to learn, like how to relate with all these different types of people. Because there were people on my team that were twice my age that had maybe been in the military and that had families. And I'm like, I don't have very much in common with them as a 23, 24-year-old. Like, I wasn't married. I went to school for business, but like I was just kind of learning things on the fly. So, it always goes back to my point that I've made several times on the podcast before about being coachable, because like I had to learn how to relate with these people and change the way I was acting. Cause like, I wasn't the one who wanted to go spend a bunch of time after I had been working for 10 hours and go develop those relationships more, than I already had throughout the day. So that was something that I had to kind of change a little bit. And, something that my wife, Elise, really had, issues with too. And, one of the reasons, she ended up, taking a different career path after that. But, I don't know if that answered your initial question. I just kind of started rambling, but, that's where we're at.
Yeah, no, I think it's good stuff, man.
Yeah, it's really good. I often equate sales to this. It's the sport of business, right? Because you have your individual players, your individual contributors out there doing their thing. Some are great, some are medium, some are not so good. And then the sales manager is the coach, right? You have to bring the team together, and you're measured. You're clearly measured on the numbers and reaching your goals and your quotas. So there's really no gray area. If the manager and leadership have brought clarity to goals and the vision for the company, and the team is bought in, which you kind of see over time, as far as your example of not feeling like you could build that rapport with the person who had the military experience in a family. I think you can do that in working hours, because I hear all the time,
Yeah.
Oh, I need to go to another work function. I just put in so many hours. Less and less we want to do that as business people. So you can do that by how you perform, helping them through the day, helping make their day easier. You can build that relationship over time.
So the way this job particularly worked is, we were out 100% of it. We'd meet at the office at like 7 a.m. We'd do our morning ramp up meetings. We were out in the field for the entire rest of the day. Most of the time I had somebody else that was training with me, riding along the entire day. So when I say like we didn't have stuff I would find some stuff we had in common by just, the sheer amount of time that we spent together. I couldn't just sit there and not talk to the person, because that would be worse than in the alternative. But I think the part that was the issue and what ultimately was the straw that broke the camel's back was just the fact that like we were working. So I would show up at the office before 7, wouldn't leave till after 7. And then we'd have another, 2 hours like later in the evening where we'd maybe go out and, do whatever it was, grab a drink or grab food. And it was just like, I was so sick of it. I just wanted some, like, I remember the guy ended up telling me, I was like, hey, I'm going to be gone for, whatever it was, like a long weekend. It's like, all right, I'm going to need you to come in on Saturday to make up that day. And I just like, I lost it.
Enough. Yeah,
I lost it. But
so the business I was in prior to this was selling office supplies, facility supplies, and enjoyed it. But yeah, there's the B2B, you have to catch people when they're at their desk, 7 a.m. and sometimes later. So it can be tough.
Yep.
Yeah. So here's my question. Again, we're sort of pigeonholed. We've obviously worked in other industries before, but I'm interested because I know what the answer is for the insurance industry. When you engage with a new client for your consulting job, how many of them already have a defined sales process of some some sort?
Almost none.
Right.
Almost none. That could be the one person shop or the Fortune 500 with 50 sales reps across the country. There is virtually no defined sales process. They might have a great, maybe a CRM system that has some automation and they've played around with that, but there's no defined process that takes it from, marketing qualified lead to sales qualified lead, and then the steps in between and who does what and what are the scripts and on and on and on. Very rarely do I see that defined. And it's critical to do in the small business because that's your escalator to growth. But the small business owner is just, they're busy, right? They do a lot of different things. They're wearing many, many hats. That's where we offer the most value, is to help them develop that structure and process and execute until they can get to the point to hire and not just do the sales themselves.
So when you look at putting together a sales process, what are the things that you consider?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. It's the team in place, who's going to execute it. Are the resources in place to hire? Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. If they are, that's great. We build the process, and then we start to find people that we think will work within the process. If it's the one person shop, we'll actually do some of the execution for them. It really comes down to a willingness on leadership to invest in some of the tech that's out there, and then pay for the new people that come in. That's the number one criteria. What's your threshold for, because it's not free. And then what's your time horizon? What are you looking like? Because it's not instant. It takes time to develop the process. It takes time to execute the process. And then how well do you know your current target market to go after those people? And that's another thing. Besides process, they don't have a great handle on their brand, and they don't have a great handle on their target market. So it's brand realization. How well does the market know about you? How well are you integrating marketing process into sales processes? Almost never. What's your pipeline, the future state of your pipeline look like? And then we talked about this, David. Can you back that up into what the day should look like in terms of number of calls that you need to ultimately drive that to the number that you need to hit, both in top line and in margin growth? What's your leadership structure look like? And then what's your customer service operations? So those are really the 5 buckets: brand, marketing integration, pipeline development, human leadership, and customer service operations. It's actually $7 threshold and time horizon. All critical factors.
So then my next question is, in addition to putting process in place, how many of them actually, if they don't have a process, they likely don't have a CRM or any system that's going to aid them in doing that, right?
Totally. Yeah. They might have something that they've started to use, but they're not quite using it. Might be a glorified contact database. They're not using it for process, or certainly not automation in a lot of cases. And the cost of the automation within CRMs is coming down. The competition is driving that cost down. So there's some great tools out there now that are really reasonable to use from both a marketing and a sales perspective. So the small organization really needs to leverage those. You can look a lot bigger than you are with the tech that's out there. Now, the art of developing that trust and relationship is being lost a little bit, but so that I spent a lot of time developing the process to really help build the trust and not just throwing content out there that doesn't make a lot of sense.
What's the biggest mistake you see organizations make when we're talking about their sales process? I understand that a lot of them don't really necessarily have a process that you're engaging with, but maybe for the ones that do, or for the ones who think they do, what's the biggest mistake?
Starting and stopping. See it all the time. They'll start down the road and maybe they get a little progress, or maybe they don't quite get the progress that they want. And instead of adjusting and tweaking, kind of doing that A/B testing, now I would say it's A through Z testing. You need to test a lot of different things. They just stop and say, that wasn't working. Let's find another tool, or finding that shiny object and just switching directions because they saw something shine through their peripheral vision and going in another direction. Stick with what you know. Stick with what you're doing, make adjustments. That's how you learn. That's how you develop a process. The processes that we develop, yes, we have things in our mind that have worked in the past for other organizations, but every engagement's different. We need to understand you, because that's really the only differentiator that you have in your business, with everything being so competitive, and then develop a process accordingly. So stopping and starting, and or being distracted by the squirrel you see running across the street. Those are two huge mistakes I see consistently.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, man, it's kind of like from a sales perspective, not as much sales management, but people get so caught up in wanting everything to be perfect before they start.
Absolutely.
And, I've always said imperfect action is going to supersede perfect inaction any day of the week. I'd rather you start, course correct along the way, or whatever, but not... Don't sit here and expect to try and get everything absolutely perfect before you start, because it's just never going to happen.
Progress, not perfection. The whole concept of perfection's a myth. You just want to get a little bit better every day. If you say we want to be perfect, you're going to drive yourself nuts, because it doesn't exist. So just progress, not perfection. I say that almost every day.
Is that so I mean, that's obviously a great piece of advice. Would you, if you had to give a piece of advice to, any salesperson, regardless of really experience or tenure out there, is it that? Is it something else? What do you think?
That would be advice I would give to management or leadership. For the producer or the sales rep, I'd say find a way with all the tech tools at your disposal to learn more about those. Challenge yourself to learn a little bit something every day. Not just take it for granted, because you're going to get left behind if you don't at least understand the tools and what their capabilities are. And if your management team doesn't know it, present that to them. Say, hey, I think this can help me, and here's why. The other thing I would say is build warmth. Try to find a way to build warmth into your outreach. A great way to do that is through video. I use dub.com, which is a great video platform. There's Vidyard, there's Loom, there's all kinds of video platforms that can integrate with whatever CRM you're using in most cases, so you can have records of it. So building warmth and learning. Never stop learning in today's world, especially with the tech tools.
Elaborate on the warmth.
Yeah, so build some sincerity into what you do. So maybe every once in a while, through either LinkedIn messaging or email or whatever platforms you're using, send a quick note. Hey, it's Tim from XYZ organization. I just wanted to reach out and see how you guys are doing. I'm not selling anything, and when it's right for you, I'd like to talk. Zip it and move on. And you can have call to actions that come up after your video and all kinds of things. But video is a great way in today's world, where we don't get out as much to shake hands or knock on doors. When I was doing facility supplies, it was knock on 20, 30 doors a day, collect that many business cards, and then the game started, right? It was phone call, email, and that's how you did it. Well, you can still do some of that. It's harder to reach people on the phone, emails, maybe 50-50. Use the other tools at your disposal, which are specific targeted searches through social media. And then you can use the video to really warm them up without sending them. You've seen the list. We get 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs through LinkedIn with videos and all this attached. I don't know about you, but I don't look at those. I don't have time, so just that 20-30-second video can go a long way with some sincerity built into your voice.
It's funny, man. The floor mats in my car used to be just littered with business cards from all the places that I would go to. I'd get them, and I would, because there was no way to like keep them and I'm not going to store them in like a binder or something ridiculous. So I would basically just jot down the important info, like the business name, the address, phone number, email, and the person's name and all that, and whatever other notes, and then get rid of them. But man, I remember by Friday, my floor mats of the car would look pretty covered.
See, I was the binder guy.
Yeah.
I got the clear binder things, and I'd slide the cards in them. And until the tech got there where we could scan a business card, early on it didn't work good. They were pretty rough, but then they got better.
Well, I mean, now it's at the point where you can scan the business card in and it'll trigger a deal creation and automation to follow up from the trade show or whatever else. I mean,
that's what we were first doing when we got HubSpot, is like I would be out on the road doing drops and I would take a picture of them and scan them in. And then that way, I wouldn't forget to put them in. And it would also allow me to jot some notes down right in there in real time so that I didn't forget anything.
Yeah, what I love about the tools today is when I think back to pre-tech tools, it was hard to remember to follow up no matter what your system was, whether you were writing it down or if it was on Excel. HubSpot or any other tool has automated tasks that can just prompt you to make that quick phone call, which is fantastic. So, if you're not using those as a producer or sales rep, you certainly should be, just to help hold yourself accountable.
Well, and let's call it what it is, man. Again, it goes back to the separation between the people who are, lazy and the ones who are out producing. I can give a Rolls Royce to somebody, but if all they want to do is lay up on the couch drinking beer and eating chips, they're not going to go drive the car. So what's the point of giving it to them? Same thing holds true with CRMs, man. I mean, you could have the Cadillacs or Rolls Royce or whatever, analogy you want of CRMs, but if people don't use it, it's worthless. In fact, it's more than worthless. It's a cost center that's not getting you a return.
Yeah, if I had somebody come into an interview and say, I'd ask them, why do you want to be in sales? And they said, well, I really want the flexibility. To me, that was an immediate no-go, because it just said to be, well, they may just want to kind of sit back. They think sales are going to come in, or at least I wouldn't give them a current book of business. It would be, they would have to develop their own book of business if we move forward at all. Because sales it's a lot of fun, but it's also very hard work, and it takes a lot of persistence and organization to be successful. If you're not going to do the work, it's just not going to happen for you. So the folks that have that mindset, it's just not right for them.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that, because I would interview people too, and I mean, I'm sure people said that, and it never really registered like what they were probably actually meaning.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting insight.
Yeah, I like the flexibility. Well, you may have flexibility, but your flexibility is what your prospects and customers need. So, which could be like you said, 7 to 7 before. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of follow up, a lot of persistence. It's worth it. It's a fun discipline, but you have to engage it.
We've been going for about 45 minutes. What have we not covered yet that you wanted to make sure we get out of this episode today, Tim?
We've covered a lot of ground. We talked about leadership and human leadership. We talked about, needs for sales process. If I had to leave a final message to sales managers, I'd say, again, educate yourselves, start to flex your mind a little bit to be a little more collaborative. If you're in the small business, you have 2 or 3 reps and then ownership, learn these tools, learn what's going to work good for your team, and start to build that personal experience into your sales process, because that's the only thing that's going to differentiate whatever widget you're selling. For the sales rep, like we said, learn and continue learning. It's going to help you exponentially throughout your careers.
I'm interested in your thoughts on this, Allied. We were getting ready to wrap up, but now I'm going to ask you a question, because with the continued learning thing, it's something that I take seriously. I think a lot of people in our industry don't, because they just pencil whip the continuing ed because you have to keep your license, instead of actually going and finding worthwhile courses to make you better at your craft. What a novel concept that is. But one of the things that you hear a lot of buzz about right now is Chat GPT, and a lot of people are using it to get information and everything else. And so the point that I'm making right now, and I've put this out in a couple different platforms and content, is if we're using it, guess who else is using it? Those prospects that you're calling on, And if you're going to go, let's just say I'm going to go meet with a precision machine shop for a workers' compensation renewal. I may go in and say, what are the workers' comp exposures for a precision machine shop in Tampa, Florida, and see what it comes out with. Well, it's very possible that I could have that prospect also go into Chat GPT and say, what questions should I ask about my insurance renewal for a precision machine shop in Tampa, Florida? And it's going to be like a never ending dance at that point. It's going to be who's using technology better. But if you're a salesperson out there listening to this and you don't think that your prospects and clients are going to use the same technology that you're using to prove that you're the right solution, to basically do everything they can to disarm you, you're kidding yourself. They're absolutely going to use it because it's so easy. And that tool is only going to get more powerful and more easy to use as it continues to learn. And the only way that it learns is through people using it. So
that's right.
Take it over like iRobot.
Yeah. It really speaks to the need to understand what your differentiation is. Really spend some time as a company to know truly what makes you different. For you, it's understanding the complete risk factor, right, of an organization, not just selling insurance. For some other company, it's going to be something else. But if you don't know that before you go in, then them having that sheet, and they will, it's just like when the internet came out. People would go to the internet and find things, and they knew more before you got there. Well, Chat GPT just takes it to the next level. Know your target market, know what their needs, pains, and wants are, and then understand what your differentiation is. And the only thing that really differentiates you is your process and your people within that. So be able to pull out those unique factors. Fortunately, we're all different, and we can pull out those factors and understand that and build that into our process. That's how you're going to win.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see how this whole thing unfolds, because it's just the tip of the iceberg. And I mean, I don't think any of us could fathom even having the ability to do some of the things we can do right now. And it's still at a relatively elementary level for what it could likely go to. But my mind is way too feeble to comprehend where this thing could head. I have no idea. Like, it's always that. So I'm consuming as much as I can from people who are already deep into the rabbit hole and talking about best practices and how to do this and how to do that. And, I feel like I'm up to speed to a certain degree, but, tomorrow I'll be behind again if I'm not constantly staying on top of it.
You know what else I think is going to differentiate, David, is how relatable are you when you go into a call or first meeting, second meeting, whatever it is. How well can you just have a casual, normal, human-to-human conversation that you're both engaged in? It's not talking about business. You're not trying to sell them something. The computer can't do that. And at the end of the day, I still believe that people buy from people they like. They're not going to buy from somebody they don't like, probably, unless the pricing is so low, and that's going to cause problems down the road, right? Especially in insurance. So, how relatable are you? Can you just hold a normal conversation and not sell them anything for a while? And then maybe when the time's right, take it to business, which I think comes to listening. It's a lost art too. How well do you listen to engage in that conversation? So the human element is there. It's still smarter. It's still stronger. We may not be as quick as the bot, but that we do have that differentiation.
Yeah, I agree. And that's probably a good place for us to wrap up, because otherwise, if I open up another rabbit hole, we're going to be going for another 10 or 15 minutes. So listen, Tim, I appreciate you coming on the show today. Thanks so much for sharing with our audience. Why don't you take just a second? This is your shameless plug. Tell them where to find you and how to get a hold of you.
Sure. You can find us at rohlinggrowth.com. It's Rohling, ROHLING, growth.com. Email tim@rohlinggrowth.com, and you can Google us and find us. We love to talk and just have that human to human conversation and see where you stand with the sales process and leadership. David and Kyle, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
Absolutely, Tim. Our pleasure. And look forward to having your episode drop here in the next 2 weeks.
Looking forward to it.
All right. Take care, brother. Everybody else, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. See ya.